Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Road to Rescue. This is a new show here on Parable of the Vineyard, and I'm Sean Griffin, here with my co-host.
Ken Heidebrecht. Hello, guys. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Ken, thanks for joining me on this new broadcast, man. I know that we already do a show on another channel together on Honor of Kings over on Kingdom of Context, which is my channel. But Adam asked us to come on and because we had an idea for a new show, and we wanted to have us come on to his channel and just kind of share this, what I think is an exciting message, because every single prophet in the Bible talks about this. And it's including Yeshua, right? Everybody's
Absolutely.
talking about it.
Everyone.
I want to be talking about what everybody's talking about. Right. So that's, yeah. I'm excited
kind of
about
the premise of our show, right, Sean? The Road to Rescue, why we called it that, is because everything that we're going to really discuss over the course of this, the show, will just be surrounded by our title, right? The Road to Rescue, because
that's right.
There's so many things that are leading up to our road to rescue, which is coming. Our Messiah, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Hey, are you seeing the screen flip back and forth?
I'm not. No.
No, I'm not either. It's supposed to flip back and forth whenever each of us talk, but I'm not seeing it flip back and forth. And you can hear me just fine. Is that right?
I can hear you just fine. Yep.
Yeah. I wonder what's going on there. Well, we'll have to do our best. We'll just manage it manually in that case, the cameras.
Sure.
If they're not switching automatically.
You can do that on your end, Sean, or
I think each of us can. So
I'm a little box on the bottom right.
Yeah, I think that well, maybe, I don't know. Adam's telling us it is flipping, so maybe it's just not showing us.
Okay.
So either way, sorry guys.
We'll work out the bugs, guys. This is the first.
Yeah, there's always always the live issues. You're trying to figure out what people are seeing. So, but thanks for joining us. The Road to Rescue. The whole point of this show is that we were going to show how all the prophets speak of the coming of the day of the Lord, and this is the moment when Yeshua returns, and how even as far back as Enoch, he's talking about it. He's describing it. He's encouraging us to know it, to understand it, to look for the signs of its return, to know how to discern what those are, so that way we're not deceived. So this is kind of our heart and our passion, is that people understand the multitude of references all throughout the books, not just of the canon, of the modern American canon, I should say, of 66, but also within the apocryphal and extra biblical books. It's layered everywhere, isn't it, Ken?
Literally everywhere, man. Yeah, absolutely. And the apostles talk about it like crazy as well, and we're going to cover a whole slew of different perspectives as it pertains to this topic.
Yes. So, well, I guess without further ado, I'm just going to jump into Joel 2. That's what we'll start out with, and we're going to just kind of pepper some scriptures in this first episode and give people an idea of all the different references, because there's, I think, Ken, one time you went through and counted all the different idiomatic terms that reference the day of the Lord. And there's just a ton of them.
Yeah, there's many synonyms for the day of the Lord, and even after I had counted them, I found even more. So
that's right. And I think in the book of Enoch, which many people on this channel are probably already familiar with, because Adam is he's beefed up on the book of Enoch as well. He's probably mentioned the term the consummation of the age many times. And that's a common term used within Enoch to speak about the day of the Lord, which is the return of the Messiah, right? The Son of God. And that's why we see later in Enoch, the actual Son of Man is mentioned. And so that's why I'm just so excited, because even though we've got different personalities, we've got different prophets speaking with different visions, they're all speaking about the same thing from just a slightly different adjusted perspective, if you will. But ultimately, it's all the same central theme, and that is victory, for the Son of Man when he returns. And but I'm an aspiring writer in my private life, and I'm fascinated with the overall collection that the Father has done throughout the ages through his Spirit to inspire, whether through through leading them to write as he directed them, or to show them a blatant vision. And you put all their words together, and it's like a grand masterpiece of just highlighting his Son, and how the Son of Man, our Messiah, Yeshua of Nazareth, is going to come back literally as the King of Glory, and it'll be a day no one will ever miss, and no one will ever forget. And I lovingly say no one will ever miss, because, Ken, you and I, we discuss theology with a lot of people, and social media is a great opportunity to do that, right? Because you can connect with people from all over the world. And very often, we run into folks that are lean towards preterist theology, and a preterist theology thinks that the day of the Lord has already happened, and I'm just like, oh no, no one will ever miss it, and it changes the world forever. It starts a new age of how it's not a difference of dispensation, but it's just a new age in how literally the Son of Man is on the earth. And so I'll just jump right into Joel 2 real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's verse 1. It says, blow a trumpet in Zion and sound an alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. Surely it is near, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness. As the dawn is spread over the mountains, so there is great and mighty people that has never been anything like it, nor will there be again after it, to the years of many generations. A fire consumes before them, and behind them a flame burns. The land is like the Garden of Eden before them, but a desolate wilderness behind them, and nothing at all escapes them. Their appearance is like the appearance of horses, and like war horses, so they run. With a noise as of chariots, they leap on the tops of the mountains, like the crackling of a flame of fire consuming the stubble, like a mighty man arranged for battle. Before them the people are in anguish. All faces turn pale. They run like mighty men. They climb the walls like soldiers. They each march in line, nor do they deviate from their paths. They do not crowd each other. They march everyone in his path. When they burst through the defenses, they do not break ranks. They rush on the city. They run on the wall. They climb into the houses. They enter through the windows like a thief. Before them the earth quakes. The heavens tremble. The sun and moon grow dark. The stars lose their brightness. The Lord utters his voice before his army. Surely his camp is very great. For strong is he who carries out his word. The day of the Lord is indeed great and very awesome, and who can endure it? So,
that's
there's
so much there.
So much there. Yeah, there's a lot of details to pick out that I think that are important. What stands out to you first, brother?
Well, Sean, I wanted to ask you from verse 3 onward, essentially, who's being referred to here? A fire consumes before them, and behind them a flame burns. I think we both agree on who this is, but
to me, this is Matthew 25:31. These are the angels, Yeshua's angels that he's coming back with. This is the army that we see in the book of Enoch, the innumerable army that stands waiting for the day of the Lord.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And when I found that out, when I was reading this and researching this chapter, my jaw dropped to the floor. I was just like, man, because we're told, the whole Joel 2 army in church is essentially believers, right?
Unfortunately, that's been a modern interpretation of this passage. But
just as you read, man, as you go verse through verse, the descriptions here are not describing any human man. And, it's just
hopefully as a believer, I'm not climbing in windows like a thief. So,
lighting the place up everywhere you go.
Yeah, and I love it that there's that little subtle nod when it says in verse 3, the land is like the Garden of Eden before them, but a desolate wilderness behind them. Because this land that they're coming into and that they're burning with complete fire, which is what we see in Matthew 13:36 through 43, about how they clear out this area. They're burning anything that's left, in my opinion, anything that's left over, if I could say it like that. Because there's multiple things happening here in this event, and we're going to get into deeper parts of that. But this particular facet of angels that we're seeing as they move through the land of promise, and that's what the land is, in my opinion, that they're moving through. As they're moving through the land of promise, nothing escapes, because they're clearing everything out of this specific geography. Why would they be doing that, Ken?
It's because they're doing what any builder would do. When they want to, put their house down. They need to clear a foundation for it, right? And there's things in the way, or people's in a way.
Yeah.
They need to get out of there.
That's right. Yeah, it's the house of God, the paradise of God is about to come down. They're literally clearing a path. And as we read in other places, other descriptions, there's an earthquake and there's some other things happening. So we're going to discuss all these details because this is a grand scene. There's multiple things happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And we're just digging into pieces of it. And this piece shows the angels that are coming back with Yeshua, these warrior angels. It says their appearance of horses. and like war horses, so they run. And that's obviously entailing something that's really powerful, right?
Yeah.
They're consuming things like stubble. I believe there's also a mention in Isaiah 33, 13, just about how he turns the wicked to chaff with the consuming fire, and no one can endure it.
Yeah.
And it says they run like mighty men. I'm not looking in the Hebrew right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if it uses the word Gibberim in verse 7 right there. They run like mighty men. They climb the walls. They each march in line. They do not deviate from their paths. This whole idea here is that they're unstoppable. That's the idea. If anyone that's ever studied, rankings and battle formations and war, to not break rank and for your soldiers to stay in formation as they move, that was the goal, right? Because that was what gave them strength and power as a unit as they were fighting. To break rank would be either to try to put a wedge in between them, or distract them by flanking them so that you could divide and conquer. Literally, that was kind of the idea. But it's not going to be happening. No one's going to be dividing and conquering these angels, right?
Well, no, especially when you realize that we're told, and I think it's Second Baruch, we're given the name of the angel that actually wiped out the 185,000 Assyrians that were encamped around Jerusalem. And so
that's true.
We've got one angel, Sean, taking care of 185,000 people.
That's right.
Well-trained, armed Chaldeans, and myriads and myriads and myriads of holy ones coming on the day of the Lord. So it's it's not fair. It isn't fair for who has to try and attempt to oppose this.
Well, that's why when it talks about in Revelation 9, the 200 million chimera-like things that come up out of the pit, and Apollyon comes up with them, and he's the king over them. And I mean, that's 200 million of the bad guys right there. And then in Revelation 16, I think it's verse 18, talks about the 3 demonic spirits that come out of the mouth of the false prophet, the beast, and the dragon, and they go out into the earth and gather all the kings of the earth and their armies for battle. And then they all end up meeting in the Valley of Armageddon, which is also referred to in Scripture as the Valley of Jezreel. And that's going to be just a little bit southwest of Mount Carmel in this huge valley. And it obviously would fit 200 plus million entities. It's a massive, massive area that's a flatland in between these mountains. And that's the famous place where it says the blood will reach the bridle of the horse, because they're just going to get slaughtered, And that's not because they're getting slaughtered because they're coming up against Yeshua's returning, and you couldn't defeat him anyway. But he's coming up against all these angels as well. Yeah. And like you just talked about, we have Ramil, which I believe Enoch 20 is that gives us the name of the angel of the Lord, Ramil.
Enoch 20, yeah.
Yeah. And then he's the one that takes credit in the book of Baruch for taking out the 185,000 Assyrians in the days of Hezekiah. Yeah, and he actually explains, doesn't he? He explains how he does it. He says he didn't even destroy their armor and their breastplates and their shields. Yeah. He just burned their bodies from within, so that the people that would see all those dead bodies would know it was not man that did that.
Yeah, it was a miraculous event. Yeah,
it was a miraculous thing, and that's, man, I can't even imagine. I don't think Hollywood would even try to broach that scene in any movie, right? Because they never want to obviously give power to God and righteous judgment, right? So they always want to twist it anyway whenever they try to do biblical themed movies or whatever. But can you imagine that scene? You got a kid walking outside of Jerusalem that morning, and he realizes the camp is quiet, or just as
ghastly, man, it would be ghastly.
It would be crazy. The day breaks and the watchman on the wall realizes nobody's moving in the massive crowd outside that's been outside for a while of the city, and suddenly you're just realizing, oh my gosh, they're not moving. What's going on? I'm just wondering, because remember, they were holed up in Jerusalem because they were being besieged by was it Esarhaddon, the king of Assyria? I can't remember his name.
Yeah, I can't remember which name it was.
Sorry. But yeah, and that's why Hezekiah was praying for deliverance from them, because they were holed up in the city being besieged. And how long before they came out and saw those dead bodies? Just one angel took out all those people. And here we got myriads and an entire multitude of army of angels coming back with Yeshua.
Yeah.
So,
and from what I can tell, Sean, Ramael isn't even the toughest out of the angels.
Right. Yeah, he's not the one that grabs the dragon. That's Phanuel and Michael and Uriel and Raphael. Exactly. Is that right? So
that's right. Yeah, Sean. So in verse 11 here from Joel 2, where it says that Yahweh utters his voice before his army, that just reminded me of a passage that I'm reading out of Habakkuk in a few minutes. I just wanted to quickly bring up verse 16 from Habakkuk chapter 3, where it says, chapter 3 rather, where it says, when I heard, my belly trembled, my lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered into my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. When he cometh up unto the people, he will invade them with his troops. So this is interesting, man, because we're getting another, like you said earlier, at the beginning, this is a synonym for the day of the Lord, right? The day of trouble. That's another reference directly to the exact same day. And so Habakkuk is essentially being given a vision of what's to come on the day of the Lord. And he's experiencing as if it's happening to him. And he's seeing that Yahweh sends his troops to invade the people that we just mentioned in Joel 2. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's true. That's and just watching this, it's got Habakkuk trembling, Yeah, and which is why we also see that same reaction from Enoch, don't we? Yeah, when he sees that innumerable army standing before the throne, he's like, "Who are these people? It's amazing. It's terrifying."
Yeah,
I'm kind of paraphrasing, obviously, but but yeah, he has kind of the same reaction. He's just aghast and in shock and amazement. Actually, hey, do you want to read? Do you want to read from Habakkuk 3?
Yeah, sure, I can do that right now.
Because there's some pretty juicy stuff in there leading up to that verse that you just mentioned.
Yeah, totally, man.
Looks like
3 to 15.
Let me see. Habakkuk 3. Yeah, if you start probably in around like verse 3, I think that's probably a lot of description in there.
All right, so it says that God came from Teman and the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. And his brightness was as the light. He had horns coming out of his hand, and there was the hiding of his power. Before him went the pestilence, and burning coals went forth at his feet. He stood and measured the earth. He beheld and drove asunder the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. Their perpetual hills did bow. His ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Was Yahweh displeased against the rivers? Was thine anger against the rivers? Was thy wrath against the sea, that thou didst ride upon thine horses and thy chariots of salvation? Thy bow was made quite naked, according to the oaths of the tribes, even thy sword. Selah, thou didst cleave the earth with rivers. The mountains saw thee, and they trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered his voice and lifted up his hands on high. The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. Thou didst march through the land in indignation. Thou didst thresh the heathen in anger. Thou wentest forth for the salvation of thy people, even for the salvation with thine anointed. Thou woundedst the head of the house of the wicked by discovering the foundation unto the neck. Selah. And thou didst strike through with his staves the head of his villages. They came out as a whirlwind to scatter me. Their rejoicing was as to devour the poor secretly. Thou didst walk through the sea with thine horses, through the heap of great waters. When I heard, my belly trembled, and I just read this. My lips quivered at the voice, rottenness entered into my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. When he cometh up unto the people, he will invade them with his troops.
Okay, man, I see a couple things I want to talk about. One, it looks like the passage I read in Joel 2. I think it was in verse 10, Joel 2, verse 10. It talks about before them the earth quakes, the heavens tremble, the sun and moon grow dark, the stars lose their brightness. And then you look in Habakkuk 3, and it looks like in verse 11 that you just read, sun and moon stood in their places. They went away at the light of your arrows, at the radiance of your gleaming spear. We also see another reference, which I didn't make any notes on, but we see another reference in Isaiah 30 about the sun being affected on the day of the Lord. And, so it seems to me, and this is why Zephaniah 1 talks about it being a day of darkness and gloom. Just like I believe at the beginning of Joel 2, it talked about, verse 2, a day of darkness and gloom, of clouds and thick darkness that spread over the mountains. So this is where, to me, this is a strange day, because if I'm not mistaken, is this saying kind of like in the days of Joshua that the sun and moon are going to stand still?
Yeah, verse 11 is saying that the sun and moon stood still in their habitation. So It appears to me that they're not moving, literally.
Yeah. Which, if I hope everyone on this channel is familiar with the biblical creation model, because that is going to help you understand this context to some of the placement of some of these things we're talking about. So just like in the days of Joshua, when, you had the sun and moon standing still for a certain amount of time for battle, but it doesn't say that the sun and moon lost their brightness, though. Whereas this one is talking about not only are they still, but they're not going to shine properly. And that, to me, I'm sure there's clouds out, but we also see other passages about the stars falling to the ground on the day of the Lord. So yeah, it's hard to keep your brightness above the firmament if you're falling to the ground. But as far as the sun and moon, to me, it seems almost as if the actual biblical creation model was affected so greatly that the sun and the moon stopped shining. Because as we've already read, Ken, in the book of Enoch, it claims the moon gets its energy from the sun. It charges up over time.
Yeah,
I think it's verses chapter 77, 78, maybe.
Yeah, and the moon receives what, 1/7? Was it 1/7 the portion of the sun?
Yeah, it grows over time, the waxing and waning process, and it's not reflecting the sunlight like in the heliocentric model teaches. But the biblical creation model teaches that it's actually charging up. Right? It's almost like you've seen those glow in the dark material. You put the light on it, and then you turn the lights off, and it's shining real bright. But if you don't do that and you turn the lights off, it shines very little. And so it's kind of the best analogy I can think of for the moon, according to the book of Enoch. And we're seeing application of that idea here in Habakkuk 3 and Joel 2, where sun and moon seem to be affected at his return.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it's just going on with verse 11 here. It says, they went away at the light of your arrows, at the radiance of your gleaming spear. So the light, that kind of, it reminds me of the movie 300, where our arrows will blot out the sun. And then Buddy says, well, we shall fight in the shade. Well, with this day of the Lord, these arrows are radiant beams of light, essentially, right? And they're overpowering the radiance of the sun, probably, that you wouldn't even tell that there's a sun, because they're going to be so bright, on top of the brightness of, the angels and the Son of Man coming. It's going to be a bright day.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. To me, it's almost as if the light bulbs in a big room are turned off, and that's why when he comes back, he's every eye will see him, Revelation 1:7, because he's the only light in a huge darkened room. It's kind of the picture I see in my head, and that's where you would have people trembling, absolutely trembling.
I mean, Sean, we're even told that every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, and this is in reference on to the day of the Lord, and those in heaven above, on the earth, and below the earth. So they're going to see, somehow they're going to see this below the earth, this event, right?
Well, there's massive earthquakes. We haven't even got to those descriptions yet. I mean, we got,
but somehow the earth shifts in such a way that they're going to be able to see this, right?
Right. Yeah. It's not, there's massive land movement on the day of the Lord. Yeah. Probably the best, most generic way, without going into all those verses right now. That's definitely gonna be for another episode. We'll, hopefully by the end of this, just after 5 or 6 episodes, the viewer will start to realize how much of the scriptures and the prophets spoke on this topic, and that you will be amazed that hopefully, not only will you not be deceived if someone shows up in the future claiming they are Jesus returning, so you'll be able to quickly dispel that falsity, but you'll also be able to enjoy reading scripture, because you see just how much the prophets always spoke about this, and because they wanted us to know this day, that this, to me, this is one of the most, aside from the first coming and Yeshua becoming our atonement and, selflessly dying on the cross to become our high priest, this seems to be one of the most talked about themes in all of scripture.
Yeah, this is the day that Enoch goes into great detail over, and he blesses those who are going to exist on this day.
That's true.
He makes a massive blessing to those who are going to exist. So,
in fact, he starts out his entire book talking about this day in chapter 1, doesn't he?
Yeah, and we're going to get to that. But yeah, Sean, it's fascinating, because it's sad that there are those, as you had mentioned earlier, that take a preterist perspective to all these descriptions, right? It's because they don't understand, and they're not willing to take literally these descriptions, right? That's been a common issue in Christendom, is that people are just willing to make everything chalk it up to an idiom. It's figurative. It's poetry. It's all these things. And in doing so, it's just putting a shroud of obscurity over the mind of the believer when they're reading this stuff. They can't discern between what's true, what's literal. You know what I mean? So the day of the Lord, guys, is not an idiomatic expression for something like, armies are coming, because I've heard that one. I've heard that, when the Babylonians came and were attacking Jerusalem, all the descriptions that we're talking about the day of the Lord, they say is idiomatically supposed to be interpreted as an understanding that it's just poetic sounding, verbiage for armies are coming, right? And I don't take that perspective seriously at all, Sean. Just, you can't, right?
Yeah, there's so many details that we're about to get into that, to think that all this was fulfilled in 70 AD, the destruction of the Second Temple, the invasion, the slaughter of 500,000 Hebrews in Israel, this was a horrible event and everything, but all these descriptions we're talking about, the world is forever changed. So it should be pretty apparent that is a poor interpretation at best, is the way I could.
Doesn't Peter mention essentially, Sean, that this day is going to be likened to pretty much what the flood was like in the days of Noah, where catastrophic events took place on this earth?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, let me read real quick from Isaiah 60, because there is in Isaiah 60, we have another mention of this concept. I'll just read verse 1. It says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, darkness will cover the earth, and deep darkness the peoples. But the Lord will rise upon you, and his glory will appear upon you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes round about and see. They all gather together, they come to you. Your sons will come from afar, and your daughters will be carried in the arms. Then you will see and be radiant, and your heart will thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea will be turned to you. The wealth of the nations will come to you. A multitude of camels will cover you. The young camels of Midian and Ephah, all those from Sheba will come. They will bring gold and frankincense, and will bear good news of the praises of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar will be gathered to you. The rams of Nebaioth will minister to you. They will go up with acceptance on my altar, and shall glorify my glorious house. Who are these that fly like a cloud, and like the doves to their lattices? Surely the coastlands will wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish will come first, to bring your sons from afar, their silver and their gold with them, for the name of the Lord your God, and for the Holy One of Israel, because he has glorified you. Foreigners will build up your walls, and their kings will minister to you. For in my wrath I struck you, and in my favor I have had compassion on you. Your gates will be open continually. They will not be closed day or night, so that men may bring to you the wealth of the nations, with their kings led in procession. For the nation and the kingdom which will not serve you will perish, and the nations will be utterly ruined." So I see, first of all, I just want to throw out this, there's several big events that happen on the day of the Lord, okay? We're going to go into all these descriptions. As we read these passages about the day of the Lord, we're going to read these. And now, am I saying that every description we read happens literally on that day?
No.
Exactly. Yeah. So the day of the Lord is the time that Yeshua reigns, the millennial reign, the seventh day of creation. I mean, this is the seventh idiomatic day, and this is all of it is his day, right? Because he reigns on the earth and from Mount Zion. So I just want to share with people that the first resurrection happens on the day of the Lord, and this actually kicks off the day of the Lord. It happens at the last trumpet of Revelation 11. That seventh trumpet sealed, that seventh trumpet judgment is the first resurrection, and that is
that goes in line with what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, right?
That's right. Yeah.
At the last trumpet, everyone rises up from the dead.
Yeah, both. I think it's 1 Corinthians 15, 51, and also 1 Thessalonians 4, 14 through 18. He talks about this, this last trumpet. The dead in Christ rise first. Those who are alive and remain will rise after them. But it's at this last trumpet with the shout of the archangel. You just read in Habakkuk 3 that the Lord's voice utters before his army. You know what I mean?
And you had read in Joel 2, verse 1.
And I read, that's right.
Trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm on my holy mountain.
So that trumpet you're seeing that blows right before he descends with his angels, that's the first resurrection event.
Yeah.
And this is what we see layered throughout other scriptures that we're going to eventually get to. But what I want to really discuss, though, is who this chapter is actually talking to in Isaiah 60. Some of you will have like little subtitles that your translators put in your version of the Bible that you're reading, but some don't. So if you're not gleaning it from the context of what it's talking about. But guys, this is talking about the New Jerusalem. This is talking to the New Jerusalem, which is called Zion in the Old Testament many times. And it is the actual paradise of God that ends up coming down through the firmament to be set down on the ground. And that's why it says things like, arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord has risen upon you. And this is the moment where all this has been waiting for this bride to be revealed and brought down to the earth. And that it says the nations will come to your light and the kings to the brightness of your rising. Because remember, Revelation 21 tells us this thing's massive. It's 1,500 miles squared. It's 1,500 miles tall. And when we keep that in perspective of the biblical creation model, everyone on the earth is going to see the New Jerusalem. I don't care if you're the furthest reaches of New Zealand or on some coastline of Antarctica. If you understand the biblical creation model, you're going to see, even with visual perspective and things fading away because the eye only sees so far. But that's why I think the New Jerusalem is so big. Not just because it fills the land area of the promise, but also so that everyone will see the kingdom of God. And Mount Zion is within this massive city, and Yeshua sits on top of Mount Zion on his throne, so that literally, I hate to, Ken, I hate to use this analogy because, it's like a joke. It's like a bad joke almost, but it reminds me of the Lord of the Rings. It reminds me of the eye of, was it Sauron or whatever?
Sauron, yeah.
Sauron, like the big eye it was at a really tall tower, so it could see everything, right? Now, clearly that's a depiction of something bad. I'm just trying to say that, if there's anything I could possibly, just imagine, that's the mountain of Zion is going to be the tallest thing on the earth at this point. So no matter where you are on the circle of the earth, Isaiah 40:22, you're going to be able to see the top of Mount Zion. You're going to be able to see literally the throne of God in the distance with the brilliance of his light shining throughout the city, which is why it says the nations will come to your lights, because it will be, it will always be true north, all pun intended, right? It will always be, you'll know exactly where it is. You'll never be able to miss it. And I think that's amazing, because it says, lift up your eyes round about in verse 4 and see, they all gather to you. They come to you. Your sons will come from afar. Your daughters will be carried in the arms. Now, to me personally, I think this is speaking of this verse 4, speaking of the resurrection, because we also read in Isaiah 49 and Isaiah 66, it talks about Zion is actually speaking. And she says, well, who are these children that have already been reared and are coming to me? And the angels are bringing them in their arms. And that's us, the first resurrection. The sons and daughters of glorified into our royal priesthood. And I think that's fascinating that we just get a description from the perspective of the actual city of watching this happen.
Yeah.
And then it talks about, verse 5, how you will be radiant, your heart will be thrill and rejoice, because in this moment, she's considered the desolate woman. She's without inhabitants, and there's no animals that live there. It's just, it's the Zion is yet to be glorified and filled with those who are it's destined for, because it's the land of promise, but it's yet to have its actual inhabitants, if you will. So it's in a waiting period right now. And then it talks about the wealth of the nations will come to you. We actually see that in both Zechariah 14, also in Revelation 21. I believe it's verse 22 or something, but it just talks about how all the nations, the gold and silver is brought. We also see that Enoch chapters 51, or chapters 52 through 54, I believe, where all the wealth of the world is brought to Zion. What I'm excited about.
I know, it's crazy, man. It really is crazy when you start seeing the subject matter kind of in the proper perspective, right? I mean, I've had so many issues years ago reading over what is this being talked about? Who is this? For your light has come, the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. And I always just chalk these parts of prophecy up as poetry. This is just, right. I'm going to, skim through this. Where's the good stuff, right? Because I don't understand what this is talking about. But when you start seeing that it's from the perspective of the New Jerusalem, which is referred to as the bride, the Lamb's bride in Revelation 21, you're you become dumbfounded. It's so weird. It's like, how come I wasn't taught this growing up? This is insane that there's a building that's being,
that's right,
talked about in personified like language.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, I've made the joke before, let's make the New Jerusalem literal again.
Yeah, no kidding, man.
Because it needs to be for people to have the proper understanding when they read some of these prophecies.
Yeah. I mean, that's the gospel of the kingdom of God, right? That's the kingdom that Yeshua preached about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeshua went around everywhere preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God. He only just a couple times that I can find, he actually spoke about himself as far as his sacrifice on the cross before his glorification. So the bulk of what he actually preached, which lines up with what John the Baptist preached and Matthew 3 or John 3, and Matthew 3, I believe, is talking about, the gospel of the kingdom of God. And it has all these descriptions of destruction of the wicked that we've been reading about in Habakkuk 3 and Joel 2, the same type of verbiage. Even though, I didn't really prepare those scriptures or anything, but I think that that's fascinating because think about this for a second, Ken. Like the last verse I read here in Isaiah 60, verse 12 says, "The nation and the kingdom which will not serve you will perish, and the nations will be utterly ruined." We see something like that, right, in Zechariah 14, where it's almost like the nations that don't come up to the Feast of Booths, they don't get any rain on their land, and then the same plague that affected those who tried to fight against the coming of the kingdom of God on the day of the Lord, that same plague is affecting those who are rebelling during the millennial reign. Does that sound right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And that's just, to me. So here's the big question, right? You have a city that God has prepared. I go to prepare a place for you. So I tend to think he's talking about this city. And in Isaiah 49, we can read that in another episode, but Isaiah 49 talks about how the Zion itself had to enlarge its borders to accommodate for all the inhabitants of the first resurrection that's going to happen. So it had to kind of enlarge its borders, which is why once we actually see it descend, it's 1,500 miles squared. Now, without getting into the debate of whether it's a pyramid or a box or whatever, I personally think that it's squared on the bottom, but it has kind of a dome top because it matches the firmament and the way it's from all the descriptions. And so I that's kind of like personally the way I view it, and just Isaiah 4, the way Isaiah 4 talks about it. But
no, I see that too, man, just because of what Moses was told to, make with the tabernacle and all that stuff. I think there's some interesting work out there that would show, I think his name's Andy Hoy or something like that.
Yeah, Andy Hoy. Now he's talking about the specific tabernacle, and he claims that it's supposed to be, a dome with a circular walls, a circumference of walls, instead of a rectangular shaped building with actual four corners. Yeah. I've been trying to reconcile the description of the New Jerusalem in Revelation 21 that descends, in the day of the Lord after Yeshua returns. I've been trying to discern, because it does call the city four square, but yet the other descriptions about how it, the height of it and the, how it covers people and everything, it makes me think it's domed off like the firmament. And so that way, but now Andy Hoy's idea that he was talking about, because he's an engineer that put together the information given to Moses for the tabernacle, that could be speaking about the house that we see in Ezekiel, which talks about the Holy of Holy, the most holy place that we see in Ezekiel inside the big city, on top of the mountain.
Those are the latter chapters, right? Was it 40?
Yeah, it's 40 through 48. And I believe this most holy place is maybe chapter 43 or 44. I have to go back and find the exact verse, but and that could be more of a round building with a dome top, because that's an actual, like the tabernacle Moses saw and made the pattern after, in the wilderness. That could have been what he saw within, like Enoch sees within the firmament, within the walls of the firmament of the city. He sees the different mountains and different different things happening, the house, the greater house, and so that's where I tend to think that that's what Moses saw, not the actual city itself, but some details within the city of the real tabernacle and God, with God. And I think that's just my personal opinion. Right. If you guys are welcome to ask questions in the comments or whatever. If we're actually at the end of the show, in the last 15 minutes, we're gonna have a question and answer section for anyone that's following along live, if you want to ask any questions. So, but what I'm trying to get to, Ken, is like, if this thing is 1,500 miles squared and it's coming down through the firmament, how in the world what does that look like? Right? Does Peter talk about something like that? I'm trying to remember. Is it First Peter or? Second Peter.
Second Peter, is it 3?
Do you have that? I'm just see if my internet's running slow.
I don't think it talks about the actual building.
Well, I'm saying if that's coming down from heaven, which, Genesis 1 defines the heaven as the firmament.
Yeah.
Or actually the word heaven was given to the structure made on day 2 called the firmament. And so if it's coming down through that, you would think that it's going to mess up the firmament, right?
Yeah, right. Okay, so I'll just read 2 Peter 3 here. I think it's
okay.
Yeah. Starting with verse 5. So this is I should give a little context here. So Peter is basically saying that there's people who are scoffing. Where's God? Where is he? He hasn't showed up anytime soon, and he likely won't, because we don't really believe that he will. And so Peter's addressing these scoffers, and he's saying, for when they maintain this, it escapes their notice that by the word of God the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and by water, through which the world at that time was destroyed, being flooded with water. But by his word, the present heavens and earth are being reserved for fire. Okay, so that's what you're referring to, Sean, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The heavens bring Uranos in the Greek.
Yeah, in the Greek, it's a word Uranos or Uranos. I don't know exactly how you say it, but that's the same word for firmament or rakia that we see in the Hebrew in the Old Testament.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So,
it's actually it's used just interchangeably generically as the word heaven, but we don't know if like in the Old Testament we see specifically the firmament mentioned, and then other times it uses the heavens, or it'll say the heavens or the highest heaven. But in the New Testament, it just uses one word instead of two, and it's just talking about, it just says Uranos or Uranos.
Yeah, right. So, yeah. I'll just finish that off, Sean. But by his word, the present heavens and earth are being reserved for fire, kept for the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men. So here we have another synonym for the day of the Lord, Sean, the day of judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Verse 8, but do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like 1 day. Where have we heard that one before, Sean? Oh, you cut out there, buddy. I'm not sure. Are you muted?
I was just saying, I'm trying to remember the verse off the top of my head.
Yeah. I think it's in Enoch, isn't it?
Where he talks about the day is equal to 1,000 years.
Yeah. Or was it Jubilees? I think it's Jubilees, isn't it?
I want to say Jubilees like 2 or 3.
Yeah, somewhere
wrong.
Anyways, so the Lord is not slow about his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. So he's just given us the day of the Lord again, right? In context with the day of judgment. It'll come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. Since all these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God? So we have another one, the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat. I mean, you can't get any more obvious than this, Sean, with what he's describing, right?
Yeah. How do you burn the elements with heat, and the heavens are burned and the elements with intense heat? Yeah. So what is that? What's going on there? Is that the idea when it talks about the firmament's rolled back like a scroll?
Yeah, I believe that's the moment when that happens. And I mean, we might even think that the angels and their ability to light things on fire, along with all the other fire that's coming down through the firmament, will be a part of the melting and all that stuff. But yeah, it's
pretty wild. It seems like the firmament itself suffers violence on this day, because because it says, what is it, Matthew 24:29, the stars fall to the heavens, and Isaiah 34:14, the stars fall to the ground on the day of the Lord.
Yeah.
Revelation 6:14, the stars fall to the ground. So to me, that's like, think about it like this: if the firmament was designed on day 2 of creation, like Jubilees tells us and Genesis 1 tells us, the firmament itself has its own structures and layers and everything. Genesis 7:11, during the flood, it says there's floodgates that opened and water poured in. Because remember, the firmament was a structure that separated the water above from the water below. The water below receded and the dry land appeared, and that's how we have the open firmament where the birds fly, which is what we would call our sky. Yeah. But then the actual structure itself is still supporting waters above it. So that's what we see in Genesis 7:11 when those floodgates open, water falls down in.
Yeah.
But apparently on the day of the Lord, with what Peter is talking about here, it seems like there's it's not like a pre-designed floodgate, is it? It's almost like it's literally being ripped open or burnt open or something, to the fact that where the stars fall to the ground, which doesn't seem to be like an intended thing about the design of creation. It seems to be definitely a show that you're not in space. You're in a firmament structure that was designed at creation.
Yeah.
And everybody will see that, right?
Yeah, that's right. And David mentions in Psalms that the water's still above the firmament, right?
Yeah, Psalm 148.
So, going back to Habakkuk 3 then, Sean, where it talks about in verse 10, the mountains saw you and quaked, the downpour of waters swept by. What do you think possibly that when the firmament of the heavens rolls back, that the water that's up there also, I mean, where does that go? Is that
Exactly. The stars are falling to the ground. There's still water up there. So is there going to be water that falls down too? And will he direct that water in certain areas? I mean, is it going to fall and cause periodic or regional flooding and tidal waves somewhere? I mean, there's so much fun speculation there. But let me look real quick. I believe it's in Daniel 7. It just talks about, and I know that Daniel is definitely a book that requires interpretation in many of its chapters. But I think it's in verse 26 or 27. Let me look real quick. Where it just talks about the end will come with a flood. And that's the phrase that pops in my head that I'm trying to remember.
Okay. That wasn't in chapter 12 of Daniel?
Is it chapter 12 that I'm thinking of?
Because it talks about the day of the Lord on that chapter, I believe, too.
It may be chapter 12 or chapter, just talking about the end comes with a flood. It could be it.
Yeah, but it's hard to track what is all taking place because it is unbelievably chaotic. Right. And Peter is essentially saying, in verse 13, but according to his promise, we are looking for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. So we want this, right? So another synonym for the day of the Lord is the great and terrible day of the Lord, Sean. And I believe that Peter's referring to the great part in verse 13 here in reference to those who are going to be resurrected and brought into the new Jerusalem and protected, right? And kept away from all this stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that exact phrase was used in that Joel 2 passage I read at the very end there, that, it says the day of the Lord is indeed great and very awesome. It doesn't call it the great and terrible day, but there's just so much to piece together, and that we hope that we're able to do this in a coherent way so that those watching are kind of getting this idea here that there's an abundance of moments that we can talk about this, and it gives us every conceivable description and detail that you may ask about, that we can think that the Father chose to give to the prophets, even down to the point of the elements burning with heat. And that's actually something I wanted to look at real quick, because that was in 1 Peter 3. Was that what you're reading from?
I think it was 2 Peter.
2 Peter 3.
Yeah, 2 Peter 3.
Yeah.
The elements burning away.
Verse 15. Because the reason I say that is because this okay, maybe it's a little further down.
Verse 10.
Yeah, verse 10. At one point I looked this up, and I thought the Greek was pretty interesting, because it talks in many translations, it says the elements will be destroyed with fire. But it also says that the heavens will disappear. Well, we know that's the firmament, and obviously that's why the stars fall. Yeah. But this is Greek word lithosete. If it's stoicheia is the word for elements.
Stoicheia.
Yeah, it sounds Russian almost, right? Stoicheia.
Yeah.
But it's basically, if you look in its definition in Strong's, it's just showing it to be the heavenly bodies, a rudiment, an element, a rudimentary principle, or an elementary rule. And that's, to me, an elementary principle and heavenly body, both descriptions, well, that's Exodus 24:10. It said it was like the throne that they saw on the mountaintop there, the 70 elders having that meal with Moses and Aaron. In Exodus 24:10, they saw the God of heaven, right? And under him was a throne whose clearness was as the clearness of the body of heaven. You know what I'm saying? So you have a description for this word in the Greek talking about, it's calling it the elements, which sounds like a modern scientific word, right?
Yeah.
It sounds
when you think of that, you think wind, earth, fire, water, right? The elements.
Right. Well, personally, me, I think of like, I don't know, hydrogen and nitrogen and helium and these things that, in our scientific modern prowess, we've been taught to think of all these gases, these gases that are lighter than air that rise in our atmosphere, and they somehow go out into space in some timely manner, even though there's -14 psi supposedly within space with no barrier connecting anyway, that's a different topic. But just to me, that's what I think of as the base elements, that somehow they're burning away. And this is where you have a lot of interpretation in the past where people will say, this is the moment where Yeshua is ripping past the veil, right? He's ripping the veil open between dimensions and he's about to come in. So where Ken and I, we ascribe to the biblical creation model, and we would say there's no interdimensionality happening. The only dimension, if we can loosely use that word, the only dimension is above the firmament and below the firmament, right? And then Sheol. So we're in the realm of the earth, the land.
In between, yeah.
Yeah, and then above us is the heavens, quote unquote, above the firmament where the Father's kingdom is, and that land is, as Enoch explains to us. Yeah. And so when he's breaking through the firmament, he's not coming through some interdimensionality. He's literally changing the creation model that we see expressed to us in Genesis 1. And that rudimentary, elementary rule of the firmament that's been up there, that body of heaven, that body of firmament. Remember, the word heaven is the name given to the firmament. So that body of firmament is being dissolved away as if with heat, apparently. Yeah. And so that's how we get this other, synonym style phrase of ripping it back like a scroll, right?
Yeah.
So I just think it's fascinating. You get a lot of details there, man. It's
crazy, man, because the book of Enoch, without the book of Enoch telling us that stars are essentially, a class of angel called the luminaries, right?
Right.
If we don't know that these luminaries are up there performing their circuit above the firmament of heaven, that they're sentient in a way, because we know that there's an angel, Raguel, who polices them if they don't maintain their orders, right? If they don't maintain that circuit, if they don't perform it, and there were some heavenly luminaries who transgressed their orders and were put in their prison. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, when we look at the canonical texts, where in Revelation we're seeing stars falling down to the earth in a heliocentric model, that can't work.
That's right. But then does not work.
Enoch, we know what those things are, right?
Well, not only would we have to ignore the actual definitions given in Scripture about these creation concepts, but then you try to apply those in practical application of the multitude of verses that talk about the day of the Lord. Heliocentric model is a fallacy. Can't work. It's not what God described, and it's not the reality we live in. It's not the reality of the return of the Messiah.
Yeah, and because people are, indoctrinated with this. Well, I mean,
Sure.
you were.
I was.
They go to the scriptures and they view prophecy and eschatology when we're given these types of descriptions of stars falling to the earth.
Yeah,
well, it gets classified into idioms, poetry. It's, you don't take it literal. It's it's all just no, guys, no.
And that's a basic hermeneutic that I hope anyone watching would know, that Ken and I, we basically read the scriptures with the way we read scriptures, which is, be your hermeneutical process, right? How you're deciphering what you're reading. If it's a metaphor and allegory, there will be an example of that in the application of the context, right? So that'll play out, or it'll just blatantly be told to you, this is the vision. This is the explanation of the metaphor of the vision, right? This is what, the beast with the 10 heads and the, what I'm saying, and the crowns and everything. This is what this is what the crowns represent. This is what the heads represent. We get that in Revelation 17, explaining what they saw previously in Revelation. So that the Bible explains itself. And if it doesn't in any other book, right, then that means that there's a little application of these concepts being mentioned, and this is how you keep everything in context to the point where it grants you understanding. When you decide to just, because you didn't understand it the first time you read it, and then someone has convinced you to take that now and reinterpret it to mean something different, that's when you lose understanding for the overall context of the vision being shown to the prophet, or just the application of what's happening that the Father's trying to tell you. He's trying to give you the information so you're not unaware, right? So that you are informed, and that you are ready and you're not deceived. So, for example, the things that we've been talking about as Ken, as far as the day of the Lord, you have Yeshua returning with angels through the firmament. He's about to bring in a massive city that no one's going to miss. I think it's it's Psalm 47 talks about the people see the city coming down and they're just running in fear, right? The wicked, not the righteous. We've been resurrected. But right. The wicked see the city coming down, because you're not going to miss a 1,500-mile piece of land coming down that's glittering with, highly purified walls as of gold. And, what I'm saying? You're not going to miss that. So they're scattering, they're running. Which would make a lot of sense of why we see them in Revelation 6, I think it's verse 14 maybe, where it talks about how they are trying to hide in the hills and tell the rocks to fall on them.
The rocks to fall down on them.
Yeah,
they're so
because who can endure the wrath of the coming of the Lamb.
Yeah.
So we have this moment here where we're getting all these descriptions of these amazing, awesome things where the kings of the earth are in terror. Okay. So how would this help us in practical application for our lives? Well, not only have we been describing a biblical creation model that works in the application of these concepts, but politically, have we ever seen the kings of the earth hiding in fear and terror, trying to get underground from any worldwide event happening over Jerusalem? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when the beast shows up, the Antichrist, are we going to see that? What does the Antichrist actually say? What does it say about how the people receive the beast? And I think it's Revelation 17, right? They're amazed that he who was, who is not, yet is again, and they worship and wonder after the beast, right?
Yeah.
So they say, who can make war with the beast? So they're impressed. They're not running in fear. They're impressed with him.
That's right.
And to the point of worship, right? And in my opinion, it's because they've been trying to get him to come back for millennia now.
A long time, yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's been all part of the grand plan. So, and that's I guess a different show, but ultimately to me, this is a great snippet of safeguarding for your heart, your mind, your theology, your doctrine, your faith, that you can look at these things and you can say, hey, none of these descriptors are happening. So whomever is over there claiming to be the return of the Messiah, that may not be him. Right.
100% agree, Sean.
Hey, and speaking of, do you want to read Enoch 1?
Yeah, how are we doing for time?
We're running, I think, about a little over an hour right now. So we'll get to the next segment, and then we'll take some questions.
Okay. Yeah, we'll head over to first chapter of Enoch here. And I'm reading from the Sefer, guys. I know you guys are familiar with that. I believe Adam and Justin tend to read out of that. So it says, the word of the blessing of Enoch, how he blessed the elect and the righteous who were to exist in the time of trouble. Another synonym, Sean, right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Time of trouble. So whoever's alive during those days, experiencing those days, this is for you. You get a blessing from Enoch. Rejecting all the unrighteous and wicked. Enoch, a righteous man, who with Elohim answered and spoke while his eyes were open, and he saw a holy vision in the heavens. This the angels showed me. From them I heard all things and understood what I saw, that which will not take place in this generation, but in the generation which is to succeed at a distant period on account of the elect. That's another interesting little tidbit of information, Sean, isn't it?
Yeah.
Upon their account I spoke and conversed with him, who will go forth from his habitation, the holy and mighty one, the Elohim of the world, who will hereafter tread upon Mount Sinai, appear with his hosts, and be manifested in the strength of his power from heaven. All shall be afraid, and the watchers be terrified. Great fear and trembling shall seize them, even to the ends of the earth. The lofty mountains shall be troubled, and the exalted hills depressed, melting like a honeycomb in the flame. The earth shall be immerged, and all things which are in it perish. While judgment shall come upon all, even upon all the righteous. But to them shall he give peace. He shall guard the elect, and towards them exercise clemency. Then shall all belong to Elohim, be happy and blessed, and the splendor of Elohim shall illuminate them. What an interesting chapter to start off your
Man.
crazy eschatological book, eh?
Oh, there's so much, man.
He gives us yeah, there's a ton here.
Yep, there's so much there. And I just love it that, we're getting some of these same ideas about he's returning. He's got angels with him.
Mountains melting like wax, hills being raised up, right? As you had mentioned earlier, everyone's going to be able to see. Why? Yeah. Because of this event, right? Everything's being leveled.
I mean, even in verse 3 and 4, it talks about the Holy Great One will come forth from his dwelling. The eternal God will tread upon the earth, even on Mount Sinai. There's two phrases in there I'd like to address real quick, just in case people are confused. We got Hebrews chapter 1, verse 10 is quoting Psalm 45, verse 6 and 7, when it mentions that Yahweh speaks to the Messiah, his son, and calls him God, right? Because this word in the Hebrew is Elohim. So Elohim speaks and calls little Elohim, little E-L, okay? So the big Yahweh, all the Almighty, as referred to in Exodus, who before he revealed his name as Yahweh, the Almighty speaks to the Son and calls him Elohim, calls him God. And that's why he's considered God to us, right? We can call him God too. Even though he's reigning in the authority of the Father, right, as we see in his reigning on Zion. So just so people aren't confused with that, that's why I can say the Holy Great One came forth, you know what I'm saying? The eternal God treads upon the earth, even on Mount Sinai. And I actually wanted to touch on Mount Sinai real quick, because we just read that earlier, and Habakkuk, you already read that, about how he comes through Paran. Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the desert region that the mountain of Mount Sinai is in.
It's in Arabia.
And the wilderness of Paran, is that right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So what we're getting here is we're getting a directional description. We're getting wayward, military points, wayward points, right? He's literally going to come from here, from there. Remember in Habakkuk, it also talked about your horses tread upon the waters, right? Yeah. It treads upon the sea, okay? Yeah. So obviously within the region of the Middle East, within the region of the land of promise, we've got the Dead Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, we've got the Red Sea, we've got the Sea of Galilee. Which sea is it talking about? It could be talking about all of them, because these guys are swooping in and they're clearing everything out so that the New Jerusalem can sit down.
1,500 miles by 1,500 miles, right?
That's right. So there's a lot of seas invaded in that. So I just think that's fascinating. We're getting, and this is where, in the future, I actually am planning on, putting together a small book that's actually going to detail each chapter will be a different perspective that the scriptures give us for all these events that's happening, where we're going to see, like, for example, here, he's coming from the south, right? It said in Habakkuk 3, he comes from Teman, from Mount Paran. And that's where I think that it's that also that reference to Mount Sinai and Enoch that you just read. I think it's referring to the same region. Now, this is where, you've got Watchman Alexander did a pretty unique analysis a few weeks ago, maybe even a month ago, when he talked about the new city of Neom, yeah. Right? That's planning to be built in this region that we're just talking about, along the actual coastline, though. But that could be why he has to go down there, because by that time it could be a hotbed of activity, population center, militaries, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So
crazy plans involved with that and building.
Yeah. Supposedly it's going to be what do they say? Like many, many times bigger than New York City. Like, just ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's going to boast towers much bigger than anything that Dubai has.
Yeah, and we see how fast they put up Dubai in like 15 years. It's a mega city. So, it's
interesting.
I don't know. I just think that when the elite wants to get something done, they get it done. And, and especially if they're trying to build. Now, is that going to be future Babylon, like a literal city that I don't know. Personally, I have my own theories on Babylon, but I just love that these descriptions start to line up as far as the geography, because we can actually see where he's going to go when he's battling things on the day of the Lord, Yeah. So that's pretty fascinating. Let me see. In Baruch, it actually talks of, what chapter was that? 32? Let me read out of Baruch real quick. And it says, this is chapter 32, verse 1. It says, "But as for you, if you prepare your hearts so as to sow them in the fruits of the law, it shall protect you in that time in which the Mighty One is to shake the whole creation. Because after a little time, the building of Zion will be shaken in order that it may be built again. But that building will not remain, but will again after a time be rooted out and will remain desolate until the time. And it just basically generically calls it the time right here, right?
Yeah.
But I believe with the overall context, it's talking about, the
day of the Lord.
The rebuilding of the second temple, that's destroyed by the Romans, and then it remains desolate until the time of the age of the consummation, when the Messiah returns. In verse 4, it says, and afterwards it must be renewed in glory and perfected forevermore. And that to me is what Zion is, the coming New Jerusalem. So therefore we should not be distressed so much over the evil which has now come as over that which is still to be. For there will be a greater trial than these two tribulations, when the Mighty One will renew his creation. So to me, you're just talking about there is mass destruction, and we already read some descriptions earlier about how the creation itself is affected at his return. Yeah, but we get the promise that it will be renewed as well from Baruch.
Yeah, and these two tribulations, right? You got the one during the days that Baruch is alive writing this, right? And then when they, some of them get regathered from Babylon and come in to rebuild the temple, that gets destroyed in 70 AD. So there's your two.
Right.
So we know the next one is going to be something much different, right?
Yeah. One that requires renewing the creation. Yeah. That's a big day, right?
So I guess what we're saying, Sean, there's nothing going to be built by man's hands, right?
Exactly. So any temple that we see thrown up in modern day Jerusalem, is that Zion? Is that the temple of the New Jerusalem that comes down through the firmament? You know what I'm saying?
I hope not.
I mean, if that, so to me, like, and this is where we want to tread lightly, because we know there, we know there's a lot of people that, the mainstream churches for many years now, many prominent pastors have been teaching this idea that modern day Israel is the fulfillment of many of these passages.
Yeah.
Right. That the gathering in 1948 was somehow, the Jeremiah 31 gathering, and that this is the fulfillment of these passages. And they claim that, Israeli dominance militarily is going to be able to set up the greater kingdom and that's kind of, it's from what I understand, that seems to be the political plans for Zionism, is they have what they call Greater Israel. So they want to retain the borders that I guess David and Solomon had back in the day, which means they're going to have to take out Jordan and Lebanon and Iraq, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And all those countries that surround them. They'll have to take out all of the Palestinians, so the point is, there is an actual political plan for Zionism that many people aren't aware of. And then in the midst of that, they're talking about building a temple, and they're literally been flying in Levites, literal descendants of Levites from the Ethiopia, from those who are in Ethiopia currently that are Levites. So they've been flying them in and doing temple preparations. So like retraining the Levites on all the temple preparations that we would see happen in the tabernacle in the days of the history of Israel. But this is not the New Jerusalem to come, is it, Ken?
Sean, no, it's not.
So this runs into a controversial topic with people, and for some people, it's a really hot button topic, and we want to address it with sensitivity. We want to address it with love, and more than anything, we want to address it from the scriptures. So that's why we're trying to, lay down a foundation, if you will, of many of the big descriptions of the day of the Lord, so that whenever things do happen in that region, we can know if it's from God or if it's a deception from the enemy.
Yeah.
Amen.
And that's what we want to do, right? We want to be watchmen. We want to be awake and alert to what's going on, and we don't want to be deceived.
Yeah. And the Father has given us word. Yeah, exactly. You beat me to it. Yeah, it's in his word. He's already given it to us, and that's how we stay away from deception, as we just know his word. And then also, there's a couple more verses I want to hit real quick. Ken, did you have anything else in the next segment you want to talk about?
Just out of Esdras, you mean?
Yeah. Do you want to read from 2nd Esdras?
Yep, sure, man.
Okay.
I love this book. In chapter 12 here, which I'm going to be reading out of, verse 11 makes an interesting little mention to Daniel. It says, "The eagle whom you saw come up from the sea is the kingdom which was seen in the vision of your brother Daniel, but it was not expounded unto him. Therefore now I declare it unto you." So, Sean, my speculation with this interesting couple verses here is that Daniel was told, to seal the book, right? You're not going to be shown what the interpretation of this is. And then that's it. That's all we're told. And then you come into this book of Esdras, second Esdras, and we're told that Ezra is given the interpretation of one of Daniel's visions. So that's fascinating, right? We kind of need that.
That's right. We do. Yeah.
So yeah, anyways, I'm going to start reading out of verse 31 here, which talks about the vision and the interpretation rather. But
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and the lion whom you saw rising up out of the wood and roaring and speaking to the eagle and rebuking her for her unrighteousness with all the words which you have heard. This is the anointed, which El Elyon has kept for them, and for their wickedness unto the end. He shall reprove them, and shall upbraid them with their cruelty, for he shall set them before him alive in judgment, and shall rebuke them, and correct them. For the rest of my people shall he deliver with mercy, those that have been pressed upon my borders, and he shall make them joyful unto the coming of the day of judgment, whereof I have spoken unto you from the beginning. Interesting. That's where I believe he's referred to as the Line of Judah, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And it mentions the day of judgment, and which Baruch tries to remind them, I've been talking about this from the beginning.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
Yeah. And it shows a distinction between the wicked who stand before him in judgment, and then the righteous who are shown mercy, which would allude to the resurrection, how we're glorified with him.
Yeah.
So that's where,
And what are his borders, Sean? What those that have been pressed upon my borders, he shall make them joyful.
To me, I mean, there's a promised land, and that land has geographical borders, which would mean, remember in Deuteronomy, I think it's Deuteronomy 19:14 maybe, where it talks about, the Father does not want you moving the ancient boundary stones, and there's a reason for that, because he designated the land of promise a long time ago.
Yeah.
Even way before Abraham. Before it was promised to Abraham, because it was being passed on from Shem. So there's a lot to it. There's a lot of history there, but the point is that it's all the same storyline, and it all culminates for the day of the Lord.
Yeah, amen.
So yeah, in fact, let me see here. In the book of Sirach, let me see if I can jump to that real quick. Reminds me of something. Sirach, was it in chapter 5?
Yeah.
Let me read this real quick. It says, set thy heart upon the goods, and say not, I have enough for my life. Follow not your own mind and your strength to walk in the ways of your heart. And say not, who shall control me for my works? For the Lord will surely revenge your pride. Say not, I have sinned, and what harm has happened to me? For the Lord is long-suffering. He will in no wise let you go. Concerning propitiation, be not without fear to add sin unto sin. And say not, his mercy is great. He will be pacified for the multitude of my sins. For mercy and wrath come from him, and his indignation resteth upon sinners. Make no tarrying to return to the Lord. Make no tarrying to turn to the Lord, and put not off from day to day. For suddenly shall the wrath of the Lord come forth, and in your security you shall be destroyed, and perish in the day of vengeance. Set not your heart upon goods unjustly gotten, for they shall not profit you in the day of calamity. So what I like about this is that we've got basically a scoffer, right? We've got a guy saying, look, he's merciful. What's he going to do to me?
Yeah.
He hasn't done anything. He hasn't done anything yet. So I can keep sinning and not have a problem. And, he's long and yeah, that, Ecclesiastic, Sirach is actually affirming, yeah, he's long suffering, he's merciful, but his wrath will come, right? Because and he says, don't put off turning to the Lord, do it. Don't put it off from day to day, which reminds me of that famous passage from the Torah. It says, choose ye this day, right? Today is the day of salvation, right? That's the day that you can turn from your ways back to repentance, to the commandments of God. And he says, don't tarry, because suddenly the wrath of the Lord come forth. And so what this reminds me of, Ken, is in Revelation chapter 1. Because it says, let me go there just real quick. It talks about, this, obviously we know the book of Revelation is talking about, much of it is about the day of the Lord. Yeah. And it says, this is the testimony of the things which must soon take place. And as I've said at different times in the past, that this word in the Greek here, which says must soon take place, is the word takios or tacos. Yeah. It's like tacos, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this word in the Greek is talking about immediacy and with speed, right? It's not talking about the events of Revelation would take place in the lifetime of John. It's talking about the events you're about to see are going to happen quickly. When they do happen, they're going to happen quickly with speed, immediacy. And so this is what reminds me in Sirach here. He's talking about, repent, because you don't know when the day of the wrath of the Lord comes, it happens quickly.
Yeah, like a thief in the night, right?
Like a thief in the night, exactly.
Yeah,
So we have all these same allusions to this concept, and that, which is why the wicked are caught off guard in a sense. But
yeah, a lot of people, Sean, get tripped up on, like time qualifiers. Like, well, didn't he say soon? Like things like I'm coming soon, and they think, well, soon has to literally be like, within their time frame. It can't be thousands of years down the road, right? But
right, and yeah, that's where I was trying to say that that's the Greek word takios, which means, it doesn't mean soon as in in the next 5 minutes or 5 years. It means like when these things happen, it's happening quick.
Yeah.
So it's very
all those preterists who may be out there watching. Tacos,
man. In fact, it actually, that's the statement at the beginning of the book. So that's something to ponder. Like everything about to be said is going to happen quickly. So I know a lot of people, and even myself in the past, I try to dissect the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and I thought, well, maybe that's been happening over a long period of time. But the more I start to study the day of the Lord, the more I start to think, well, maybe that's happening real quick when it does happen.
Yeah, it
seems and that
to be
could,
really quick.
Those 4 horsemen could be actually, affecting the wicked and not the righteous. Now, we do have time qualifiers in the book of Revelation. We got the 42 months of Apollyon. We've got, that's a big time qualifier, right? Because it's told in Revelation, I think in 9, and also 13, that that's all the time he has. And at the end of that, that's when Yeshua returns, right?
Yeah.
And we got the Revelation 11, we got the 2 witnesses that also, I think they prophesy for 42 months as well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So we've got a huge time qualifier of this 3.5 year time span, 42 months. But the things that are being described within that, to me, I think that they're all happening in a short, quick amount of time, especially the ones that happen on the day of the Lord, which I think are most of the trumpet judgments. Yeah. So anyway, that's probably for another full-on show. But did you want to read anything else, or do we want to take any questions from the audience?
I think we should see what the audience is saying. Let's see what kind of questions have manifested over this hour plus of conversation. Sorry, guys. Yeah. Sean and I wanted to just start off this episode with a bang, right? Like, just fire off some in-your-face, controversial descriptions surrounding the day of the Lord. And I mean, like, that's the premise of our show, right? It's the
right.
The road to rescue. So this is our day that we're going to get rescued, and so it's just amazing.
Yeah, this is what we're reading is the road to rescue. Because it's all the great descriptions about everything leading up to this day of our salvation, where we're redeemed. If we're dead, we're redeemed from Sheol, given resurrection bodies. If we're alive and remain, we're caught up. That is the actual harpazo. It's not a pre-trib rapture. It's a day of the Lord rapture. We're caught up after the dead in Christ are raised, and we're given our immortal resurrection bodies. And I mean, it's a beautiful rescue. And
Paul knew it so well. I think most people don't realize that Paul, he had such a good grasp on the day of the Lord and the events and the timing of the resurrections, right?
Yeah.
Who are alive are going to be changed in the twinkling of an eye, but they're not going to precede those who are dead already. Those come first, and then they get caught up. It's just going to be a beautiful, fluid motion on that day. You know what I mean? It's just, I just wonder if Yahweh's been so patient because he has to orchestrate this all happening. He's just like practicing it out or something in his mind. All right, this is going to happen. This is going to happen because it's so busy. It's so busy, but it's going to be so, with surgical precision, he's going to do these things.
Yes, I mean it's all been laid out for us too in the scriptures. Everywhere he goes, what he does, it's going to be amazing. So Ken, as we're talking, I'm perusing through some of the comments, looking for any questions. If anyone's watching live and they want to ask any questions to us before we end the program, it looks like someone named Bruce Youngbar is. He said he's 70 years old and. He's calling us blessed. He says, you young people are so blessed and privileged. I'm 70 years old. We never had this in my day. We need to be very thankful. So Well, thanks, Bruce. We appreciate it. I don't feel too young, but I mean, I'm 38. I'm not a spring chicken anymore, but I'm not. You've definitely got some years on me, but I'm excited that this is a unique. I do feel like we live in a unique time where the Father's revealing His word to people.
Yeah.
And if you hunger and thirst for righteousness, He's going to give you His word, right?
We have access to so much, John, so much information at our fingertips, and
yeah,
we can't be lazy. And even though that's kind of how our society is geared, is laziness, and the art of picking up a book and reading it is slowly being lost. But
well, what we run into is we have a generation, it seems like, that is not accepting the status quo of the answers given to them from previous generations. So, and I experienced this, when I went to Bible school, when you start to see things taught, and I could not find it in the scriptures, and I just didn't quite understand. And I could see where they were taking the words and trying to make some eisegesis out of it, try to make sense of it. And they were doing the best they could. I don't think any of them had ill intentions. I think they had good intentions. But, you get to a point where you're like, you're not going to accept the status quo when it doesn't make sense. You're not just going to go with traditions of men, and you're going to be like, look, the Lord gave me His book and He said that I can understand it. I'm going to believe Him, and I'm going to research it until I understand it. I'm going to keep reading it, washing my mind with the water of the word so that I can break through all the lies in the world around me. Which reminds me, I think it's in Sirach 6 where it just talks about, how if you, continue to keep your mind busy with the commandments, you'll get the wisdom that you seek.
Yeah.
And that's
meditate on His word, on His Torah, His law, day and night, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
Put your time in,
so,
you're going to reap rewards for sure.
So Bruce Youngboy, thank you for the compliment. We appreciate you. I'm kind of going through some of this and seeing if there's anybody that has a question. Usually, many times with these chats, they're just people are talking to each other, which is fine. But I'm just, if anyone has a question, we'd be glad to help. We'd be glad to try to offer anything or answer anything. It looks like people have asked who the two witnesses are, Ken.
Yeah, that's a good question.
That is a good question. Do we even have a definitive answer ourselves?
Honestly, Sean, I know we've discussed this in times past.
Yeah.
There's a few individuals who might fit the position. Obviously we've got Joshua and Zerubbabel. Possibly, I'm not sure, because they're mentioned as the two lampstands.
Yep. I know that's
some people speculate Enoch, right? Enoch, possibly John, potentially, because of Yeshua's cryptic statement to Peter about, if I want to keep him,
yeah,
I want to keep him around till I reveal myself. So who's, what are you gonna do about it?
Yeah, I know. Well, the way I think about it is, personally, and this is, I know this may not be the most popular, but I personally don't think Enoch is one of the two witnesses, simply because I believe Jubilees chapter 7 and Jubilees chapter 10 tell us he's dead.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to be the guy that's walking through the hall popping out kids' balloons and knocking over ice cream cones, but I just don't see, I understand the wording of Hebrews 11. I've studied it intensely. I understand Genesis 5 mention of Enoch and Hebrews 11. And I just, understanding the first resurrection event and all the descriptions about that, what happens to the saints on the day of the Lord, I don't see Enoch being that guy. Personally.
Well, it's hard to think that, especially if we believe in the validity of Jubilees, right? As you just mentioned, right. It says that he dies. So
yeah, and actually it says he's taken somewhere for a specific purpose. And then there was a time period that before the flood, he ends up dying. And that's where, maybe we can save some of that for a special episode, but, because he's kind of like a precursor to what we get with Yeshua, as an example, as a typology. Enoch is a wonderful precursor because he has a responsibility pertaining to Zion up until a great judgment, right, which was the flood. Yeah. And so that's where the book of Enoch gives us allusions to it. Jubilees directly tells us. And, I always try to remind folks that you've got the canon that we have in America has been altered throughout the years. And, the original canon going back in, the Eastern Orthodox Empire in the last 2,000 years, the canon has changed off and on. But the Ethiopians, they've had the same canon for 2,000 years. And in that canon, you had the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees. And these are descendants of Levites. They're believers in Yeshua. They're keeping the law. They're keeping the feasts. They're keeping the Sabbaths. They love Yeshua. They're walking in the commandments, and they're just chilling in Ethiopia, not drawing any attention to themselves, really. They're considered by modern day political Israel, they're considered beta Israel, because they know they are from the scattered tribes and they're actual descendants of the Levites. And in their Bible that they've always had Enoch and Jubilees in it.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge testimony to the validity of those books. They actually use the calendar in the book of Jubilees for many of their festivals that they practice and observe.
Yeah.
So,
crazy.
It's a huge modern day witness that many believers in the United States don't know about.
Yeah, it's a huge endorsement to Jubilees and Enoch. Big time.
Yeah,
big
really
time. They've had it for over, like 2,300 years. It's crazy.
So imagine if we had that growing up in the 20th century and the 21st century, and we're reading about who the two witnesses are, and we're trying to figure it out. We would have never guessed Enoch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know who they are. I mean, I know Second Ezra mentions potentially Ezra. It alludes to him in an interesting way about being removed. And I know Second Baruch talks about Baruch being removed too, but we know later on in the chapters of Baruch that he ends up going his, the way of, all men who die. They go to their fathers. So I don't think it's Baruch, possibly Ezra, but I don't know. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say that as well. Like, I know that there's another popular theory that Baruch is one of the two witnesses, but it seems to say, is it chapter 49 or 52? It seems to say that he gathers leaders to them and tells them he's going to die. Yeah. And he doesn't tell him he's going to, and all the references about him being preserved in the book of Baruch is talking about going to Sheol and waiting there for the resurrection. And that's actually explained in context in the book of Baruch. So
yeah, you're right about that. And many people are being preserved, right? Many of the righteous who are waiting for their resurrection are being preserved in Sheol. So
yeah. Well, I'm going through the comments. I don't see any other big questions left out here. Someone asked a question, could it be the spirit of Enoch? But I didn't know exactly what they're asking about. Maybe they're talking to someone else in the chat. They're not asking us. Someone else said, I believe Hope Davis asked, maybe the two witnesses are the two groups of 144,000, one from Israel and one from the Gentiles. Personally, I would say that, the word Gentile is defined by obedience to the commandments. And if you're obeying the terms of the covenant, which is the commandments, you're grafted into Israel, as Romans explains to us. So you're no longer a Gentile. Ken and I do not ascribe to.
Sorry, I was going to say, and if you're a witness, you're doing the commandments of God, right?
Exactly. If you're one of the two witnesses, because apparently these guys they don't eat or sleep. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so they just prophesy and they're just speaking the words of the Lord for 42 months, which is phenomenal. And anyone that tries to attack them, you have this, fire coming from their mouth, and no one can kill them. So those guys are definitely walking the commandments to exhibit that kind of authority and power. Who are they? That's a great question, man. I guess the best I can do is just say if we find out, we'll tell you.
Yeah, there's other extra biblical books out there, right?
Yeah, we have
the answer, because if I were an elite class of corrupt individuals who wanted to remove important chunks of information out of the scriptures, I'd want to get rid of a book that might actually allude to these two guys.
Exactly. But ultimately, according to Revelation 11, it's not going to matter anyway. Whoever these guys are, they can't be touched for 42 months. And only after their testimony is finished are they going to be able to be killed. And then 3 days later, they're resurrected on the day of the Lord. In my opinion, according to the timeline that I've put together, they seem to be like that 42 months leads up to the return of Yeshua. So just like the 42 months of Apollyon seems to be, at the end of his reign, Yeshua returns. So, it's like, people are always asking for a timeline of all this kind of stuff. I'm like, if you're still alive when the 42-month reign of Apollyon, who's called the Destroyer, when that starts, you got 42 months. Yeah. So that's your time frame for me. But anything else you'd like to say, Ken?
No, unless there's any other questions that you can spot. I think we've covered a good chunk here. We've gone for about an hour and a half now, and it's been edifying, man. I hope you guys have gotten something out of this. I know Sean and I are very passionate when it comes to, the day of the Lord and all the themes that surround it. And I think that's what we're going to really focus on moving forward with the show is just to get people looking in the direction of the day of the Lord and understanding all the concepts that are involved with that. So yeah, guys, leave your comments, your questions, please interact. And thank you for joining us. And Adam, Justin, thank you guys for.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. It's a lot of fun.
It really is.
It's a lot of fun. Let me just take out this URL real quick. I'm going to remove the URL from the bar so I can screen share. And there we go. So if anyone, we actually, Ken and I do a weekly show on YouTube. It's on my channel, Kingdom in Context. And it's basically, we discuss the extra biblical books. So if you are interested.
Yeah, and we go line by line. So right now we're currently in the book of Enoch. We're going to be releasing an episode for we just did chapter 21, 22. So we're only, a decent little portion into that book. If you guys want to join in, we do that every Saturday night.
Every Saturday night. And we just go line by line. It's called Kingdom in Context. And we're in episode 6 or 7 is coming up this weekend. And so it's been a lot of fun. And I just hope that, if you guys are welcome to join us over there as well. But otherwise, keep supporting Parable of the Vineyard. This is a great channel. Adam and Justin are great. And they have a great, they have a great vision for their channels. And they're providing awesome content for you guys. So try to support them as much as you can. Don't forget to check out the Christian Truthers channel, Justin's channel as well. If you've never seen any of his work, he has great videos. So he has good editing, by the way. As someone that edits videos, I was impressed with his editing skills, if that makes any sense. I was like, yeah, he does some fun editing. I need to learn some tricks from him. So, yeah. But yeah. So guys, I'm just going to play our intro out, and then we appreciate you for joining us.